From high atop the city of Philadelphia on the 52nd floor of the BNY Mellon Bank Center and the Content Club studio in the Pyramid Club of Philadelphia, this is Storytelling with a Purpose. I'm your host, Jim DeLorenzo, the principal of Jim DeLorenzo Public Relations. And through this show, I want to illustrate how storytelling with a purpose is integral to my lifelong vocation, storytelling in public relations, with conversations that highlight best practices, tactics, and strategies behind the process, how storytelling works in a professional setting, what goes into it, and how it can move the listener, the viewer, or the reader to some action. Today, public relations specialist and author Irene Levy Baker joins me to discuss another storytelling technique, writing nonfiction books, and the stories she has found as both a PR professional and a published author. Irene is the author of two Philadelphia-centric books, 100 Things to Do in Philadelphia and Unique Eats and Eateries of Philadelphia. She has spent more than 25 years exploring Philadelphia's nooks and crannies and eating her way through its restaurants. Irene is the owner of Spotlight Public Relations, a public relations firm specializing in restaurants and hospitality. For more than 2 decades, she has worked one-on-one with restaurants, attractions, hotels, tourist bureaus, and others in the hospitality industry. Prior to that, she spent nearly a decade working at the Philadelphia Convention and Visitors Bureau, and it's great to have a chance to sit down with you, Irene. I really enjoy your work. I enjoy reading your books, and I've enjoyed our conversations as small as they've been in the past. I'm very grateful that you're here today.
Well, thanks for inviting me, Jim. I'm really happy to be here and enjoy talking with you as well.
One of the things that's always interested me about you and your PR role is working with restaurants and hotels and hospitality industry is that's such a specialized industry, and it's often taken for granted by other public relations professionals and other business owners, because we know when a restaurant has good PR or a hotel has good PR because we know about that place, and we just assume it's because of the food or it's because of the reputation. But really what you do is help these places develop that reputation or enhance that reputation. How did you find that as an area of specialty? How did you start your own business, and how did you pick that as your niche, if you would?
Sure. I love working in the hospitality industry because I get to see the best parts of Philadelphia, and I've seen it grow and change since I moved to Philadelphia in the 1990s. When there wasn't outside dining like there is now,
Sure.
When there were far fewer restaurants and we weren't one of the best restaurant cities in the country, before many of the museums that are here now were even open.
Sure.
So, but also one thing that's very important about hospitality is the money that it brings into the city in terms of hotel taxes, in terms of conventioneers and tourists who are eating in our restaurants and staying in our hotels and going to our attractions. And also, very importantly, the jobs that are created in hospitality.
So something a lot of people overlook.
And a lot of them are entry-level jobs.
Sure.
And the beautiful thing about an entry-level job in a hotel, for instance, is that you can grow. You can move from entry-level to front desk to sales. I mean, even the president of the Convention and Visitors Bureau, who I used to work under, started out as a hotel front desk person.
Oh, wow.
So those make it a really wonderful industry, and I love working in it.
Sure. That's kind of neat. I always look at those things when I'm doing an event, especially around some of the events that I've worked with as a PR rep for. And it's always interesting to me how different locations and different venues have different styles, and kind of adapt to those styles to make an event or an occasion a success. What was the first thing that you did when you established your own business? What was the first kind of entry you had to saying, okay, I've been working in the Convention and Visitors Bureau in Philadelphia. Now I'm going and start my own business, if you will. What was the challenge for you there as I work with a lot of entrepreneurs. I work with a lot of people who are starting a business. What was the challenge for you in starting your own business?
Well, I gave myself 6 months. I didn't know if it would work. And I figured after 6 months, I would know if my business was working or if I needed to go look for a job somewhere.
Okay.
And the biggest thing, of course, was finding clients. But fortunately, that went exceedingly well.
Good.
I staffed up with clients right away based on many of the organizations that I had worked with through my years at the Convention and Visitors Bureau who knew the work I did. So I staffed up right away. I had clients right away. It's a small firm. I am both the president and the janitor. I do all the work myself, but that means that my clients have the most senior person doing all their work.
Yeah, that's a big part of the way I project myself too.
That's why we're on the same page.
Yes.
And I don't often take new clients. Many of my clients have been with me for decades.
Okay.
And we have long-term relationships that allows me to do a great job for them, and I'm very passionate about them.
We were talking before the show about the relationships and the networking, and I think that's so important, and people tend to overlook, especially as we continue to emerge from the lockdown phase of the last few years. People overlook that connection with people and connect with individuals and the networking and the building contacts and building relationships. As you mentioned with your business, all of my clients are come to me either through word of mouth or past working relationships or past friendships or old acquaintances. And there's a lot to be said for the value of that networking and the benefit it pays for both the client and for me is that we have a long-term relationship. We know each other's strengths and weaknesses, and we can help each other out. And they understand what we're trying to do for them, and we understand what they're trying to accomplish. We kind of, I describe it as embedding in an organization, like Geraldo Rivera as a war correspondent or something like that. But one of the things that I thought was interesting prior to our discussion today was you mentioned that you're a food detective.
Right. So I just want to say that there is no greater compliment in my mind than a client you've worked with who knows your work and knows you and comes back to hire you again.
Yes.
So if kudos to you on that.
Yeah, that means a lot to me. And the way you said it just now is also something I kind of don't think about too often, but I think that is important.
So, absolutely. Yeah. And let's back up to your other question, which is why I call myself a food detective. After about 20 years having my own PR firm, I wrote 2 books about Philadelphia, 100 Things to Do in Philadelphia, followed by Unique Eats and Eateries of Philadelphia. And for the Unique Eats and Eateries of Philadelphia, which tells the stories behind 90 Philadelphia restaurants, people think I'm a food critic.
Okay.
But I don't review restaurants.
Right.
In order to get in the book, you needed 2 things. You did need to be a good restaurant.
Okay.
Because there is an implied endorsement about being in the book.
Sure.
But the other thing you needed was a good story.
A good story. That's where I want to go from there. I'm all about the good stories and finding the good stories and developing good stories and then telling those good stories.
Exactly. Like I'm not reviewing restaurants. I'm a detective looking for those stories.
There you go. Yeah. I recently started talking about what I do as I'm a private investigator who's in public relations. I will go to my clients and spend a day with them. I'll spend multiple days with them. I'll spend weeks and months with them learning what they're about, seeing what they do, seeing how it works, seeing how they relate to different people. And then, okay, this happened in this meeting. I think that's a story. I think I would like to tell that story. Would you let me tell that story for you? And you're doing that in the same way when you're putting together these 2 books. You're hearing the stories of these people who are running these businesses, these restaurants, and they don't necessarily think it's a great story. It's something that they've encountered every day, or it's just something that just happened. But you were telling me about one recently that you experienced with McGillen's Ale House.
That's exactly right. Sometimes I knew the story going into the interview with the chef. Sometimes I thought I knew the story, and it changed.
Right.
And sometimes the story found me.
Okay.
And I can give you examples of all of those.
Okay, well, let's do that.
Okay. So one time I knew the story was with McGillen's Old Ale House, which is the oldest bar in Philadelphia and one of the oldest in the country.
Okay.
It opened in 1860.
Okay.
To give you some perspective, that's the year that Abe Lincoln was elected president. That's a long time.
That is a long time.
It was opened by Catherine and William McGillen, a young Irish couple who were immigrants. People called them Ma and Pa because they ended up raising their 13 children upstairs. Wow. And after Pa died, Ma ran it all by herself up until she was almost 90.
Wow.
When she died, one of her last surviving children sold it to two brothers.
Okay.
The Spaniak brothers, who eventually, when they retired, sold it to their daughter and son-in-law, who now run it today with their grandson.
Okay.
So it's been
it's a family business.
Grandson. So it's a family business, 163 years.
Wow.
And it's, it's stayed relevant for 163 years
Sure.
while still preserving that history. So they have a great story to tell. I knew what it was going in. I loved hearing the story, and I loved telling the story.
Right. And then what was the story?
Okay, so here's a story that I thought I knew that changed.
Okay.
And that's about John and Kira's chocolate.
Oh.
Do you know their chocolate?
I've heard of it, yes.
They make the bumblebees and the ladybugs. You might see them at farmers markets, like the Rittenhouse Square Farmers Market or De Bruno Brothers. Yep. They go to schools in the area, and they grow herbs with the students.
Oh, okay.
They use those herbs like fresh mint in their chocolates. And then when they sell the chocolates, they give the money, part of the money, back to the schools.
Well, that's interesting.
It's a lovely story, but that's not the story in the book.
Okay.
All right, that's mentioned, but not the main story. The main story is that the first month they went into business, Gourmet Magazine put them on the front cover.
Wow.
And it was the Valentine's Day issue, the February issue, and called them the best chocolate in the country.
Wow.
So
that's a lot of pressure for
of course, yes,
a new business.
When the fact checker called John and said, "Hey, you guys married?" And John said, "No, but leave it in the issue." And when the first issue came out, he handed it to Kira across the dinner table with a diamond ring taped inside. I mean, that's like the sweetest story in the world about sweets.
Yeah. That's pretty cool.
Story.
That's a great way to describe it too. You're right. You're right. It's got all the elements of a good story.
And here's a story that found me.
Okay.
I went out to Kennett Square, the mushroom capital of the world, to go to the mushroom farms. And before I went to the mushroom farm, I stopped at Portobello Restaurant.
Okay.
For lunch. And I loved it. It was a mushroom-centric menu.
Okay.
And the husband-wife owner, warm and nice. I loved the place. I'm like, I have to figure out a way to get them in the book.
Right.
So after lunch, I sat down with the chef and his wife and heard their story. And they told me all about the husband's time at casinos and in catering.
Okay.
And it was very nice, but it was very boring.
Okay.
And I thought, too bad. They're such nice people, but there is not a story here.
Sure.
And then as I'm folding up things and putting them back into my knapsack, Sandra, the wife, sees someone walk by in the window behind me. And she jumps up, runs outside, and gives him a big hug. And then she came back in and said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. That was Mr. King, and I had to give him a hug." And I said, "Who's Mr. King?" And she said, "When we first opened the restaurant, Mr. King came in the first week. And right after dinner, he said he had to talk to the owner. So we went out to talk to him. And we were quaking in our boots because in a small city like Kennett Square, if we didn't have good word of mouth, we were finished.
We were done.
So we went out to talk to him, and he said, "I just had dinner here, and I'm here to tell you, you probably won't see me again." And Sandra, the wife, said, "My heart sank." And then he explained that he was old, and he had just been diagnosed with a serious illness, and he didn't expect to be around that much longer.
Okay. Wow.
And then apparently he was a retired opera singer.
Huh.
And he broke out in song and sang, "You'll Never Walk Alone." And everybody in the restaurant turned around and applauded. And Sandra was so taken with him that she said, "When you turn 90, which you will with a spirit like that, I'm going to throw you a 90th birthday party."
Okay.
So just a few weeks before I was there interviewing them, Mr. King had survived. He had turned 90.
Oh, wow.
And they had thrown a birthday party for him, and his family flew in from all over the country to be there.
That's really cool.
So Mr. King's story at Portobello and a picture of him blowing out his birthday candles at Portobello are in the book. So that story found me. And they were this close to not being in the book.
Now, do you like to be able to have stories find you? I mean, my understanding is writing the first book found you.
Yes, that's true. That's true. I never made that connection.
Yeah,
that's true.
That's pretty cool when something finds you like that, and kind of it's an inspirational thing. It gives you the chance to be open to other opportunities and other potentials.
That's interesting. I mean, I did tell you that writing my first book was life-changing for me.
Yes.
Professionally, personally, with experiences I've had and skills I've had. So it's a very interesting perspective. I guess we all have to be open to interesting opportunities.
Sure. And I think in your case, it was interesting to me in learning more of your backstory that a publisher came to you with the idea for the book. You didn't come, because a lot of times when I talk to people who've written a book, they have the book in mind. They have a dream of writing a book, or they have the vision to write a book, and it's something they've been wanting to do, or it was an idea that came to them, and they go out and they pursue a publisher, and they pursue the writing of it, and it's a process, as you know, from working with other authors. But in your case, somebody came to you and said, "Would you write this book?"
That's true, and I had the knowledge and I had the passion, but I had never really thought about writing a book.
Okay.
Both of my books are part of a national series. You'll find 100 Things books and Unique Eats books, published by Reedy Press, about more than 100 cities.
Okay.
So when Reedy Press decided to move into Philadelphia, they looked around for an author, and they heard my name a few times because I had worked in the hospitality industry a very long time. And as I say, I had the passion, I had the knowledge, and when they first presented the idea to me, I was all in.
Sure. That's a great opening too. When someone comes to you with an idea and it's something that energizes you. I sometimes refer back to William Shatner, Star Trek's William Shatner, Boston Legal's William Shatner. I saw his one-man show on Broadway. My wife gave it to me as a birthday present one year. So we went to New York and saw him on Broadway. And part of his shtick, if you will, in the show is that he says yes to everything. And he even answers the telephone, yes. He doesn't say hello, he says yes. And the way he describes it is, you never know what you're saying yes to or how that can change your life, but you know it's going to change your life either for good or bad, so why not take the chance?
I love that.
Yeah. And I think about that, and I think about being open to opportunities, and especially in our area of expertise in public relations, I'm very reluctant to turn anything down. It's got to be really something stupid for me to turn it down, and I have to be kind of stupid to turn it down because there are so many great opportunities. I mean, more than half of what I've done in my career has been telling the story of something that I had no experience with before, whether it be at the very beginning of my career, having to write and promote women's field hockey on the collegiate level, which is a sport that I had no knowledge of at that time, and then I became knowledgeable. Or whether it was we talked a little bit before the show about my experiences in 1997 working for an internet advertising company in 1997 when nobody even knew what the internet was really all about. So I'm always finding things that I need to learn about and work about. Right now I'm working with a client in the music industry, and I'm working with a client in the automotive industry, and I have no experience in either of those industries, but it's a technology play and it's a startup company in those two sectors, and I bring what I learned in technology and what I've learned in PR and what I've learned in life experiences, and I take that and I try to learn more about a particular industry. And I think that's kind of what you're doing when you're the food detective and these stories are coming to you, or a publisher comes to you and says, "Would you write this book for us?" And I think that's a phenomenal way to approach storytelling. Because really, what stories do we want to tell? Do we want to tell the same old story over and over again? Or do you want to tell a new story that excites us and will excite our audience?
I love your William Shatner story. I think that's a great story. And in PR and in life perhaps too, if we can find a way to say yes and find win-win situations, that's key.
Yeah, I think that's what keeps me going. I've been at this a while. I've got a lot of younger competition out there that is really gung ho, but they tend to stay in their comfort zone, or their experience allows. I am always willing to go outside of my comfort zone. We talk about that a lot in business terms. How do you step outside your comfort zone and do something new, something challenging, something engaging? And I think with your books and with your business practice, you're telling stories about places that people may not have ever thought of going to before, or events or venues they've never thought of going before. Like for people who live in Philadelphia, how many people who live in Philadelphia have actually gone to the Liberty Bell?
Other than field trips?
Yeah, exactly. When they were kids,
Yeah.
or how many people in Philadelphia have ever, like I remember when my wife and I were dating, I had an opportunity to go to an event where we could go to the top of City Hall and look out over the city. And it was a dinner party and an event in City Hall that offered every one of the guests a chance to go up in the elevator to the top of City Hall and look out over the city, which is not an opportunity that a lot of people have had, and I had never thought of before. But it was one of those unique things that was like, oh, let's do this, And it's one of the things that we often talk about, the experiences that we had when we first started dating and the things that we did in the city. She had never lived in Philadelphia until just before I met her. I had lived in the Philadelphia area, but I had not done something like that. So it's exploring those new things, and your stories help people find those new things and find ways to do things.
Oh, I hope so. There's
Yeah.
nothing worse than sitting down at your desk on Monday morning and thinking, all I did over the weekend was laundry and grocery shopping.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, there's nothing I love more than seeing one of my books with sticky notes in it of things that people want to do. And a lot of Philadelphians probably have been to the Liberty Bell. My books have information for newbies, like
Right.
your wife was when you met her, but also things that maybe even longtime Philadelphians haven't done,
Sure.
like Laurel Hill Cemetery.
Yeah.
Laurel Hill Cemetery is the final resting place of Titanic victims, Civil War generals, people with names like Wanamaker and Strawbridge. And you're thinking, why would I want to walk around a cemetery? But it is beautiful, especially this, time of year with leaves are going to be starting to change
Sure.
soon. The monuments are like works of art.
Yeah.
And even you'll find things like Harry Callis's grave. Harry Callis was the announcer for the Phillies. You're a
Right.
big baseball fan.
Yep.
I know you know that. And his grave is a giant stone microphone surrounded by seats from the vet.
Yep.
So I hope that even longtime Philadelphians will find surprises and interesting places to go and put sticky notes in their book.
Now, when you are telling your stories and you're working for your clients in the restaurant and hospitality sector, and you have stories that you're telling, are there particular stories that you love to tell, or are there particular stories that you I talk about telling the stories that help people do good things or are good things for them. I like to tell the positive stories. And I think that's the same with you. Are there stories that you find that really resonate with people? Like, or people come up to you and say, "Oh, I loved it when I heard you tell that story. I read that part of your book." Is there one in particular that stands out to you?
I think that, yes, there's certainly stories that I only tell good stories.
Right.
If I don't love a restaurant, if I don't find a good story, I don't
Right.
write about that.
Right.
Because, and the same thing, I won't take a client that I don't love because I feel like the passion shows
Sure.
in my voice, whether I'm talking to you on a podcast or pitching a story to the media or talking to a friend.
Right.
So and that's one of the beauties of being in hospitality is that it's a good news industry.
Sure.
Yes, there are certainly some stories that resonate with me more than others, and those are the ones I like to tell.
And do people come up to you and say that was something I would have never done before, or have you gotten feedback from people that tell you, that changed? I can remember one instance for me many, many years ago, early in my career, when I was working with the Villanova University women's basketball team. I was able to get a full-page black and white photo of one of the women's basketball players in a national publication that covered all of college basketball. And here's a full-page photograph of this young woman playing basketball, and it talked about how she was such a key part of this up-and-coming team. And that was during the late 80s when people really didn't give a darn about women's basketball or women's sports. But here was this full-page profile of her in a national publication, and I gave her a copy of the magazine when it came out, and the next day her mother, her father, her sister, her brother, they came in with cakes and candies and balloons and stuff, thanking me for getting that story in there. And I always remembered that because to me it seemed like such a minor thing. I was glad that I did it, but when I saw the reaction from the subject, it really motivated me to do more of those types of things. I was really happy with that reaction, and I wanted to repeat that again and again because it showed me that what I was doing made an impact. Do you get that from people, the experiences that you've had?
Well, I just want to say I get why you have a podcast about storytelling because that's a really beautiful story.
Thanks.
Gosh, I hope so. I hope that people read my books and have interesting experiences. I hope that the places that are profiled in the books get to be exposed to new people,
Sure.
And maybe it helps them build their business. There is something special about not just eating in a restaurant, but knowing the people and the stories behind that restaurant, I think.
Yeah.
It makes it more special for me. Every place is local and many are family owned or at least locally owned. And I hope that makes it special for both the people profiled and the readers.
I think one of the things that's neat about the way you write in the books and some of the stories you've told both in public and in the books is the experiential part of it.
For sure.
And I think that resonates with people because if you can, I call it heart share leading to mind share.
I like that.
Yeah. And I think that that's really important because if you can get people inspired with a heartwarming story, they're more likely to think of you and want to do, in my case of the people that I'm working with, they want to do business with you because you've given them something that touches their heart and influences their decision making positively. And I think that's a lot of what you do in your books, especially, is you've got these heartwarming, touching, and engaging stories that kind of inspire people to want to go to that place.
Well, thank you. I hope so. And I try to include a lot of tips to make those visits, whether it's to a restaurant or to a tourist attraction,
Sure.
better. So whether it's 10 tips for getting reservations at trendy restaurants that you hear about and seem impossible to get into, or how to find secret speakeasies and get into them, or even like secret menu items.
Yeah, we talked about that before. Yeah, there's one particular restaurant. I'm going to ask you about that when we get done. But those little tips and tricks that can really add to the enjoyment.
I have a tip for if you want to see Philadelphia with a teenager.
Okay.
Because if you want to go to the Liberty Bell and Independence Hall and Elfreth's Alley, that a teenager is going to roll their eyes.
Sure.
Because they are genetically programmed to do that.
They're the right age for that.
But you want them to see those places. So I always suggest that people make it into a scavenger hunt. Go to Franklin Square. That's one of the original squares designed by William Penn. Franklin Square has a Philadelphia-themed putt-putt.
That's right.
Mini golf.
Yep.
So go ahead. Every kid who's been to the shore loves mini golf.
Right.
So go ahead and play mini golf through Betsy Ross House and the Rocky Steps,
Sure.
also known as the Philadelphia Museum of Art Steps, and Elfreth Alley. Take a picture of the teenager next to each small icon. And then make it into a scavenger hunt by going to the real places, the real Chinese Friendship Gate, the real Love Statue. Take a second photograph
With the real thing.
put them together, and you have an awesome social media post.
That's a great idea.
And teenagers are also programmed to love having great social media posts.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things that I'm trying to also explore, it both personally and professionally. And I think a lot of people that I work with are trying to explore ways to engage on social media as a storytelling platform. And I think that's a great little example right there. I get a kick out of things like here in Philadelphia, where we're based, they just opened a Rocky store at the foot of the steps of the Philadelphia Museum of Art, which I think is hilarious. It's kind of diminishing toward the art museum, but at the same time, people are going there to see the Rocky statue. Then they go up the steps and into the museum. But the fact that there's a store that Sylvester Stallone has merchandise for the Rocky movies right at the foot of the art museum is kind of a neat new twist on the tourism marketing.
Sure. Believe it or not, the Rocky Steps in front of the Philadelphia Museum of Art are one of the biggest tourist attractions in Philadelphia.
I do know this, yes.
And even overseas, people know those movies and associate Philadelphia with that. So anything that gets people excited about Philadelphia,
Sure.
to have good feelings about Philadelphia, and, maybe they will take the time to go into the Philadelphia Museum of Art, which is one of the biggest museum of arts in the country.
Yep, it's huge.
It has a new edition with contemporary art that's outstanding. So if it can bring more attention to the Philadelphia Museum of Art, have at it.
Yeah, I think that's, and it's a neat way of connecting with people who might not necessarily go there.
Correct.
But they see the Rocky connection and they say, oh, I want to do that. And even the casual sports fan has some knowledge of the Rocky movies. I think it's funny. One of my colleagues in New York did an experiment with college students. And he always asked them what their favorite sports movies were. And one of the ones that he realized that none of them had ever seen was, gosh, I can think of the movie now, but it's the one with Gene Hackman and the basketball team, the high school basketball team. Oh gosh, this is going to bother me. But none of his students had seen the movie, and it's one of the best Hoosiers. It's one of the best sports movies ever made. And then he tried the Rocky movies, and they had all seen the Rocky movies, where they knew something about the Rocky movies. So it's interesting how generationally people are still familiar with that movie or that entertainment. And I think that's one of the things we lose track of sometimes is that people coming up, we were talking before about phone books. People don't know what phone books are. There's two whole generations that have never seen a phone book. And I think it's funny that there are certain things that might be in our institutional memory that aren't in reality still a factor anymore.
Right, for sure. Speaking of Rocky, fans of Rocky, after they run the steps and turn around and see the incredible view of Philadelphia
Sure.
from the top of the Art Museum steps, and take their pictures of City Hall from the top of the steps, can go to skip back to Laurel Hill Cemetery for a second.
Where
Adrian's grave is at Laurel Hill Cemetery. Now, we all know that she was fictitious.
Right.
However,
They built a grave site for
they
her.
built a grave site for her as a prop in the movie, and it was so popular that it has remained.
They kept it. I think
You knew
that's
that.
I did know that. I think that's hysterical, and I don't think Talia Shire likes the fact that her grave is still there and she's not dead yet.
Who would?
Right. I think one of the things that's funny is, and that's another story angle. That's something that how Philadelphia portrays itself to the world. for example, is a lot of that is tied into that story.
Yes.
Whether we like it or not, people know that story. And I think that that's funny that people still go on a tour of the Italian market, which isn't really totally Italian market anymore, but it's all kinds of food. People will run down there. Organizations will come in for team building exercises, and they'll run the Rocky Steps as part of that. Or when the Army Navy game is here, they have a competition between the Army and Navy who can get to the top of the Rocky Steps first. All those different things keep coming into play. All those different older elements of Philadelphia history keep coming into play. And I think that's pretty cool when we can draw on some historical things or experiential things that maybe a younger generation doesn't necessarily know about. That's another way of touching them with stories.
Sure.
Yeah. I wish that I could tell more stories that resonated with a younger generation about things like getting the phone book. I always think of that Steve Martin movie where the new phone book's here, and The Jerk, when he's jumping up and down because his name's in the phone book. And I don't think people would get that now. I don't think people would appreciate that as
well.
much.
For sure not. But one nice thing about Philadelphia is it's a city where you can see the United States history.
Yep.
And a lot of this is not recreations.
Right.
This is the real thing.
Exactly.
And Historic Philadelphia has made sure that there are actors in the historic district who tell the stories.
Right.
You can meet, and I say that with quotation marks, Betsy Ross. So there are ways that history comes alive for young people here. And you can see it all over the city. It's a city that loves and preserves its history. Yep. And that's something that makes it really, really special.
I have a friend, you talk about stories finding you. I have a friend who's been a client off and on, but he's a friend as well, named Rob DeVitas. And Rob was approached one day by somebody on the street and said, "You look a lot like Ben Franklin," because he has long gray hair and he has glasses. And he said, "Have you ever thought of doing anything dressing up as Ben Franklin?" So he's made a second career. He's got a very successful marketing and advertising company, but he has made a second career over the last 15 years as a Ben Franklin reenactor. He's got multiple costumes. He's been in commercials and he gives tours. But just because somebody came up to him on the street one day and said, "You look a lot like Ben Franklin," he had never realized that he looked like Ben Franklin. But he's made a second career to become a Ben Franklin reenactor in Philadelphia.
There's someone who said yes.
Right, exactly.
Opened himself up to opportunities.
Opened himself to an opportunity. And I think when we're looking for good stories and stories come our way, that's just another great way of keeping ourselves open and engaged in life, too.
And what a fun guy for him to be a reenactor for.
Oh, yeah.
There's a lot of fun history there he can work with.
He has a lot of fun stories he can tell and references he can make, and people are always learning something new about Ben Franklin. And the other thing he's always told me about was, on occasion, people will come up to him, younger kids, and he'll ask them, "Who do you think I am?" And they'll say, "George Washington, Thomas Jefferson." Very rarely he asks that question of a little kid. They say Ben Franklin, and then he will educate them on who. But it's just interesting the way people related to him, and again, being open to an opportunity, being open to telling that story. I really appreciate what you do, Irene, and I really think that storytelling and the hospitality industry, and in particular the restaurants, there's so many great stories to be told, and I think that that's one of those areas of PR that I've always been fascinated by, because every once in a while someone will come to me and say, "Can you help me with this? Can you help me with that?" And I try to help, but I'm not really as tuned into that sector as I would like to be. So I come to it through your books and through our conversations, and I think that's something that is really important in the industry, and it's a really important skill that you have, and you're a great reference for that. Obviously, your publisher thinks so too. Is it true that you have done some work for the publisher to help other authors in that space?
Yes. Thank you for, So the publisher, Reedy Press, has hired me for several different jobs, including helping authors of similar books in other cities to promote their books.
Right.
And that's been really fun. I've gotten to know some other cities and some other authors. The other thing that I do is mentor other authors.
That's really cool.
To after you write the book, the second part of it is getting your book out there so people
Sure.
have heard about it. You want people to, you've spent all these hours writing it, you want people to read it.
Absolutely.
So I do mentor authors about how to market their books, how to do book events, and that sort of thing.
And
that's
the public
very,
speaking and
sure.
yeah, I
And
think
do media. That's been very satisfying.
I think that's one of the things, and I'll close with this, is that I've worked with some authors as well, and they're always shocked. There's a lot of people who are shocked to find out that once the book is published, they're on their own. But it's true. You have to do all the marketing. You have to do all the promotion. You have to do all the public speaking for the most part, unless you're a really big, unless you're a John Grisham or somebody.
A good publisher does help you with that, and certainly Reedy Press does. But anything you do above and beyond what your publisher provides is not only gravy, but it's also great fun.
Oh, absolutely.
I wrote this book. I love talking about it. I love telling stories about it, and hopefully it encourages more people to read the books.
I did a book tour for Bill Rasmussen, the founder of ESPN, about 10 years ago. And it was so much fun to be able to get him in front of college audiences, in front of chambers of commerce and business audiences, and live events, whether it be he did a business travel industry convention, he did a sports business convention, and to go there with him and help him promote it and be on TV in all these different cities that he was going to, people don't realize how much fun that can be. If you really work it, if you really do your job, you can get a lot of play for your book.
And you have interesting experiences, and you meet interesting people.
Absolutely.
Some people think writing the book is the fun part and marketing it is not the fun part. I find the writing hard work and very solitary in many ways.
Yes.
It's the marketing that I find and the meeting people that I find super fun.
Right, because you're meeting up with people who've either read the book or are going to read the book, wanted to hear what you were talking about, wanted to hear what you're about. They've come out to meet you.
People that want to do things and are interested in Philadelphia, those are my kind of people.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's probably a topic for another day as far as our storytelling goes, is how to get that story in front of a larger audience yourself and those experiences. Irene, I really want to thank you, and I really want to mention the books again. Unique Eats and Eateries of Philadelphia and 100 Things to Do in Philadelphia Before You Die. They're both available at Amazon and other booksellers, especially here in the Philadelphia area, from Reedy Press. And I highly recommend. I have not read 100 Things to Do in Philadelphia Before You Die yet. I hope to do that next. But I have read and thoroughly reread The Unique Eats and Eateries, and I really love that book. And there's a couple places that I've been to because of your book, and a couple places that I had been to before you wrote the book, and that I thoroughly enjoyed reading about all those places.
Jim, thank you so much. I want to mention the new Barnes & Noble, independent bookstores, and my website, 100thingstodoinphiladelphia.com. And I want to thank you very much for helping me get stories about Philadelphia out there.
I really appreciate your time and your stories, and I look forward to doing this again with you very soon.